Right, so we're really grateful to Carol and Matthew from Church Grants for joining us today to do this session on building a case for support. Matthew and Carol have many years' experience of raising funds for churches, so yeah, we're really grateful for their wisdom. And I'll hand over to you. Thank you.
Lovely. Well, welcome everybody. It's lovely to see you today. Just a bit about Church Grants. Church Grants is a Christian fundraising consultancy. We also have the Church Grants database. Francis, would you like to move the next screen? Would you like to move the slides on? Sorry. So we also supply the Church Grants database, and where you're really lucky is the Diocese of Norwich took the decision to actually take out a subscription for the whole diocese, and that has been absolutely amazing. It gives us a chance to help you in this way. So Church Grants, Andrew and Matthew, who you will meet in a minute, are the actual. My name is Carol Ward, for those who've not met me before. I was the parish fundraising manager for the Diocese of London, and my role there was to offer information, advice and guidance to parishes on everything to do with fundraising. So I've done a lot in the past. And just in case you think, oh, Diocese of London, that doesn't really equate to Norwich, some of the parishes observed were right in the kind of the outskirts, so they were rural parishes. So that's me. Matthew, over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, so my name is Matthew. Andrew and I founded Church Grants together with the goal of creating the database, which we did, and it's been great actually, both in terms of people using it and having great results, and being able to do something for the church, which is, you know, very close to my heart. So Andrew and I now partners in Church Grants, but I am also, when I'm not doing that, chief executive of the Institute of Legacy Management, which is the membership body for charity staff who deal with legacies. And Carol and I met when I was fundraising director at St Paul's Cathedral. But I've been overall working in fundraising since 1999, unbelievably, for a whole range of causes.
Thanks, Matthew. So moving on. Next slide, please, Francis. What you will learn today. I think one of you said you were interested in learning about making grant applications. Yeah. Today's session is all about building the case for support. And so what you will learn is how to write a case for support that will convince internal, very important internal and external stakeholders to support your project. The steps are laid out underneath, and we will take you through those bit by bit. And as Francis said, please feel free to raise your hand and ask questions as we go through if there is anything you think, oh, I wonder. So the steps are gathering the information, the inclusions and exclusions, what you need to include and what you don't need to include, creating the structure, writing the content, editing it, because most people will put everything they possibly can into a case for support, and then you use it to get support. A solid and well-constructed case for support is actually vital to successful fundraising. So something to remember. You cannot fundraise if you don't have, well, as far as Matthew and I are concerned, you cannot fundraise unless you have a case for support. So moving on.
So what is a case for support? What it isn't in itself a trust application. And I think it's important that that we bear in mind the distinction between the two documents. What it is it's the master document for your project from which all other fundraising literature that you might need to create flows. So, I mean, it will be a written document, but I have seen them turned into very visually heavy brochures using exactly the same sort of information and used to create trust applications, used on their own to gather sort of with potential supporters. But what it really does, and I think this is a critical thing, is it defines your project. It defines what your project is and what it isn't. And one of the things we'll talk about is that one of the things I've seen in churches particularly, and Andrew and I, who isn't here today, but Carol and I have worked together on who knows how many church-based fundraising projects. And I think one of the issues you often see is that out of a desire for consensus, elements of the project are fudged because it's been difficult to achieve internal agreement about what should happen or what the underlying purpose is. And one of the purposes of a case for support is to go, this is the project, and if it's not in here, it isn't the project, and this is what the project is for. And it's sort of both part of a consensus building kind of exercise, but it's also there to flush out and engage with internal disagreement about what a project is for, which is why we talk about internal and external stakeholders, because it is vital for any fundraising project, whatever you're raising the money for. It is vital that there is internal agreement about what you're doing and why you're not doing certain things, however desirable they may be. So that is part of the process. It is part of the process of project definition, and at the end of it, you have a document which defines the project.
Thanks, Matthew. So
next slide.
Moving on. So starting at the very beginning, gathering the information, and Matthew's already touched on this, it's a description of what you want to do. So, and how do you know you need to do that? It's an evidence of the need for your project. An explanation of how you're going to meet that need with your project. And it also should contain the relevant information about your church, the statements of significance and need. Sometimes people kind of skip over those steps and think, are they really necessary? But they are really necessary. And I know somebody mentioned the quinquennial report, the QI. And if you've got a statement of significance, you can use that and feed it into your case for support. So you need as much information as possible at the very, very start. You need support for your project from the community. Now, as Matthew said, we've worked with lots and lots of churches, and sometimes we feel as a church that we know what the local community want. But how do you know that? If you don't ask them, you can't know. You assume you know. So doing a community audit as part of gathering the information is very, very important. And it may be at a later date that we can provide another webinar, another meeting webinar on community audits. Francis, that's an offer for you to think about. How much does your project cost? This is really important. I've been into churches and I've said, so how much do you need? And they've said, oh, not quite sure. Maybe 100,000, maybe slightly more. How can you apply to funders if you don't know how much your project is going to cost? And you also need a fundraising plan to identify the funding streams that you think will provide the money needed for your project. The one thing I will say here is, if your project is to do with kind of community, then you stand a much better chance of getting support from funders. If it's to do with maybe redecorating the church, then funders would expect the church and the church family to make a much more significant donation towards that work. So next slide, please, Francis.
So, and what to include, but what to exclude. And I think the exclusions are more important, more difficult, but more important than the inclusions. So you've got a pile of evidence, you've got everything. You've got your statement of needs, you've got your quinquennial, you've got your community audit, there's tons, you know, you are you're in great shape, you've done all the preparation work. And then you look at it and you think that has to be turned into what is going to be a relatively short document. And so the key fact is, must be relevant. If it's in order to go into the case for support, it must be relevant to the project. There must be evidence. We know that there is a significant problem locally with food poverty. Yes, it's entirely, you know, and anyone would be prepared to believe that is true conceptually, but they need to know that how you know that. This is what Carol was talking about, the value of a community audit. What evidence do you have? Internal evidence, external evidence, that's fine, but it all needs to be in there. Everything must be evidenced. And I tend to think that you need a balance of about 50% facts and 50% real stories. So I would always say, and actually do it in quite a sort of a mechanistic way. So your project is about local children who are hungry. You've got the piece of evidence there, whatever it may be, that there are local children who are hungry and your project will help to feed them. And then you have a piece of testimony from a local child who is being fed. And I would always actually go through and for every fact you put in, have some element of real story, anecdote to bring it to life, and do that in a quite straightforward way. And I think the reason I say 1 for 1 is because it maintains that balance. Actually, it's easy to get out of balance and think, well, we've got loads of testimony and testimony is great, but testimony must be accompanied by kind of factual evidence, and everything goes through the filter. Does this help the reader to understand our project? That is the absolute crux of it. And if it doesn't help the reader to understand the project, it is out. Right? That's the straightforward thing. And I'd be absolutely ruthless about that. Just go through. It doesn't matter how lovely it is. And you know, I've seen this manifest itself in all sorts of ways. For instance, talking about the historic significance of a church in a project that is fundamentally about serving the local community. No, not relevant. It just isn't. It doesn't matter to the project. And I think it is that thing, because we'll talk about this, but brevity, you want it as short as possible. People don't read anymore. I mean, that is the fundamental truth. People don't read things anymore. The shorter it is, the better. And so I would say always go through with a red pen and just go, every sentence should move the project forward. Every sentence tells you something about the project that you didn't know in the previous sentence. And every fact in there is directly relevant to the project you're raising money for. And that is so important. And it's so easy. I mean, you know, it is so easy to think, but you know, this and that, and it would be really good to include that for flavor. And it's really unfortunate, but you're not after flavor. You know, this isn't a vehicle for purple prose. This is a sales document ultimately. So Carol, next slide.
Thank you. I always think it's a bit like completing a job application
Yes.
form. You just add the information that's needed, not the stuff that's irrelevant to it. So the next thing is to create the structure. The introduction, or maybe you'd call it a kind of statement, and it should convince a warm supporter so if you read it, an executive summary, you should know immediately what the project is about, how much it's going to cost, and it should convince a warm supporter. The need. So what is the problem you are trying to solve? And what are the consequences if the project does not go ahead? And going back to the example Matthew gave about food poverty and and feeding children. We know from research that if that child does not have a breakfast, then their kind of work, their concentration is going to suffer. So there's lots of evidence out there. You just need to kind of explain the consequences if the project does not go ahead. And it's a bit, maybe you would think about older people who are lonely, and people can be lonely. They don't have to. Social isolation and loneliness are slightly different. People can be lonely even if they're within a community. So how can you help mitigate the loneliness? What can you do? And it's thinking like that. And what are the consequences if the project does not go ahead? Severe mental health problems, more loneliness, isolation. So why is it a problem? What evidence do you have, and why are you the best organisation to solve it, and why now? So you know what the problem is, you've got your evidence, but why can you do this and not the church down the road or another organisation? Why do you need to do this, and why at this point in time? Yeah, can you leave it for 6 months? It's the urgency that you need to get into the structure, so that people feel obliged to support it now. They need to. And, you know, how will what you're doing, the impact, how will what you're doing make a difference? What is the benefit? And how will you know it has made the difference you intend? Funders are very, very hot on kind of impact. They want to know that the money that they've given you, whether it's £1,000 or £10,000, will have the impact. And just kind of going away from the subject, Matthew and I were talking with Francis earlier, and we were actually saying that neither of us had known such a tough fundraising environment. So you can think that you're doing everything that you not even think, you will know you're doing everything you can, but you're just not getting results. It is tough out there. So just please kind of know that you are doing a really, really good job at a really tough point in time. And funders want to know the impact that their money will make, because it's even more important now to them than it has been in the past. And I kind of touched upon the money. Realistically, how much will it cost, and what's your fundraising plan to meet the target? So if you do not know how much your project is going to cost, you cannot apply to funders for money, because you don't know how much money you need. And if you think it's going to be 100,000 and it turns out to be 150,000, but you've only actually applied to a funder for 100,000, you can't go back and say, oh, whoops, sorry, I made a mistake. So you need a kind of a really robust budget along with your fundraising plan to meet the target. And that will all form part of your case for support. And then the conclusion is, this is what we want to do. This is why we want to do it. This is how we're going to do it, and how you, other people, funders people, can support it financially or in partnership, maybe gifts in kind. So creating the structure. Okay, Matthew, writing the content, I think, is yours.
Sorry, yeah, but I stay on this slide. But before we move on, the thing I would say is now consequences if the project does not go ahead are now, I think, probably the most important thing, actually, because there is not enough money to go round. The environment is really tough out there. If someone gives you money, that is money that somebody else isn't getting. And speaking to funders, a lot of them now are making the decisions on what is the bigger harm that we can mitigate with our grant. Not what is the best project, but what is the worst set of outcomes that we are seeking to avoid by giving someone money. And I think you need to be so clear now about the consequences. And as Carol said, and I think really think them through. We are giving children breakfast. If they don't have breakfast, they underperform in school. They are more likely to not attend school. You know, they will struggle, they will fail, you know, they will sort of drop out, whatever it may be. I think you really need to lean into and be really clear about the negative consequences if your project does not go ahead, has to stop, whatever the case may be, because that is more important than ever. And funders are really looking at that and going, we are making incredibly tough choices here about what we fund. We, you know, we have to know that if we don't fund this, there are very, very significant broader consequences. Sorry, and now Francis, sorry, if you want to.
Yeah.
So writing the content, be consistent in tone and style. And this is really important because a lot of the time these documents are assembled patchwork from other documents, kind of cut and paste with bits cut and pasted in. And so once you've done that, you have to go through and rewrite it all, get a single author to rewrite it all, to put it in their style. And it's really interesting as someone who reads and writes a lot of funding applications. Style, we think we don't have a writing style, but everybody has a writing style, and it jumps out if something has been written by multiple authors. It just, if you're reading applications, or you know, if you're reading this sort of thing a lot, or even if you're not actually, everybody can tell. And there is a reason why people who write well are paid a lot of money, and that it's actually relatively rare skill. Now, I'm not saying you have to write well, but there does have to be a single authorial voice. You can't jump about. And that's even use of words like, you know, my bad habits are things like my sentences are too long and I use annoying words like thus and we can see and things like that. And you get 2 paragraphs with long sentences and someone saying, thus we can infer from the available evidence, or something else that makes your eyes glaze over. And then a paragraph later, you've got something which is short, choppy sentences and very direct. It doesn't matter which way you're going, but you do have to have that single style. The other thing I would say, this is really important, assume the reader has no prior knowledge.
Yes.
Carol, please.
I was going to say, I think what you're saying, Matthew, is it needs to flow so that the reader can read and they're not thinking, they're not distracted by the different styles. So
Yeah,
just
no, I
the
think
flow.
that, yes, I think that's a very good way of putting it. That as someone reads the document, they're not kind of going, oh, you know, there aren't these sudden tonal shifts that are very distracting if you're reading a document, and also which scream that this has been assembled by committee. And there's just something the human brain does not like about that. Assume the reader has no prior knowledge. This is vital. The church, I mean, all organizations, societies, social groups, whatever you want to call them, have internal language. So, and quinquennial is a classic, right? Nobody who isn't involved in the running of a church knows what a quinquennial report is. Absolutely not. And most people, I can tell you, who are at a church but are not involved in the running of a church also don't know what a quinquennial report is. This is one of these pieces of mystery that you get when the day you step onto a PCC, suddenly this is one of the bits of jargon you're introduced to. PCC, that's another one. Nobody knows what a PCC is. All of those terms should be translated into human speak. So your quinquennial is the 5-yearly architectural report, or the 5-yearly architectural survey. The PCC is your church's governing body. All of that, just assume, assume that the person reading the document knows nothing about you or the place where you live or anything to do with you. And just absolutely, that is your guiding thing. Facts and data, again, we've talked about this, but illustrate what support you have. If you have an endorsement from your local MP, if you have a good active local MP, get an endorsement from them. They are the classic of something that is cheap but seems expensive, in that it's really not difficult to get a local MP to write something nice about you. because they are in the business of being popular, but to somebody outside your outside your world, they will look at that and go, "Cool, the local MP, that's quite impressive." And that's the oldest cheap trick in the world, but it absolutely works. But perhaps the local bishop has a shine for you and would like to offer an endorsement, anything like that, that just shows that someone who isn't you likes you. That is a classic, and just a supportive quote is great. Stories quotes pictures, and do not be afraid to edit case studies. Never put words into people's mouths, but do not be afraid to edit them down, just to make them more succinct. The people's words are, it is very important that, as I say, you do not put words into people's mouths. Tempting, but do not do it. But very much the kind of, I love this project and it makes me happy. That's great. I love this project and it makes me happy. I come every third Wednesday, but about 2:30, but sometimes I'm a bit early and I come at 2, and everybody's very nice about that. Yeah, no, cut that bit out. All right. Make sure that any supporting story does what you need it to do, which goes, this is valuable to me and I would be sad if it stopped or if it didn't happen. Again, bring it to life, make it interesting, make it about people. Center it around people. It's really easy in the church, we've all done it, to center what you're writing around the building, but you really do need to center it around people and just be quite cautious of that. And final point, simple budget and fundraising plan. There is one of the cruelties of life is that people want to give money to something they already know will be successful. And there is a bit of a chicken and egg, particularly when you're getting started, that people don't want to give you money because they're concerned you might not be successful. But unless people give you money, you won't be successful. And one of the ways you square that is by having a pretty robust fundraising plan that people look at and go, yeah, okay, that works. I can believe that they'll do that. That's quite that. I am quite prepared to believe that they will be successful in doing that. So those are the things I would say. But yeah, 1 and 2, absolutely vital. Consistent tone and style, and assume the reader has no prior knowledge, no use of jargon or 3-letter acronyms. All right, Francis, next slide, please.
So, editing the document. It is really, really tempting to throw absolutely everything you have at the document, and Matthew's already touched on this, because what he said is, if it's an outreach project but you've got stuff about your historical building, then that's a waste of space. And again, the truth of the matter is it will need to be shortened however long it is. But sometimes you do need that information, as much information as possible. So it could be that you start with your draft, which is long, and then you shorten it and make it your case for support final. However long it is, and it probably should be shorter. And also, funders will ask for information in a different way. So some people will say they just want a 1-page kind of summary of your project. Others will ask for maybe no more than 4 pages, 4 sides of A4. And some will say they want photos, some will say that they don't. Just pay attention to what the funder is asking for when you've finished your case for support and you're writing applications. Fresh eyes. For me, this took a lot of understanding. I didn't want anybody to read my document. I was happy with it. But it's amazing the difference fresh eyes and a second reader can make. Because if that person can't understand your project, you have not done your job. So get a second reader, preferably somebody who isn't familiar with the project, to read through and ask them for an honest opinion. It can be hurtful, I'll be honest, but it pays dividends in the end. Make words count. I'm like Matthew, I'm a wordsmith. I love, well, you can tell probably by the way I present, I love using long words and everything. But if those words are not necessary, then don't use them. Make every word count. Think, does this help the reader understand my project? And if not, it isn't necessary, so get rid of it. And as I said, start with the large document where you've thrown everything at, but then edit it down to produce a shorter version. And you may find, and again, Matthew touched upon this with what is a case for support, you may find that you end up with 3 or 4 different cases for support, because there will be one for the internal church family that helps them understand. But then when you come to applying to funders, because they want it in a slightly different format, then you may need to do something. Just be aware that all cases for support, however many you have, should contain the same information. Don't allow that fuzzy bit to come in that Matthew was talking about earlier. Thanks, Francis.
And the other thing I would say is keep the versions and maintain strict version control. So you have case for sure, case for support, short external, case for support, long external, case for support, short internal. All of that, keep them all with different names, original, first draft, second draft, all of that. It just helps with that sense of, if something terrible happens and you lose a version, you can start to recover it. So don't delete previous drafts, but when you're sending them out, do be very careful about the file name if you're sending it out. But and make sure that you send people the right one. So using it to support your project, it is the heart
especially
of your project.
by email.
Oh yes. And it is the heart of your project.
Yeah.
And they have all sorts of uses. Shared with the church family, so everyone is on the same page. I have seen a number of really fundamentally very good projects fail because not everybody in the church was actually on board with it, and they'd reached a point where it just felt certain strong personalities had moved it forward without securing the full agreement of the church, and had fudged around the edges in order to maintain the illusion of kind of consensus. So there it is. It's written down, and you're looking at it and you're like, is this what we, and there is a kind of a check stage, I tend to think, when you've got the case for support, where you actually share it with sort of everybody who is relevant, so whatever committees you have, and you go, is this what we all think we are supposed to be doing here? This is the point at which, if you think there is some misunderstanding or there is some nuance to the project that we haven't got, then now is the chance to speak up. And after this, we are done, and further discussion will not be entered into. You cannot have, on the one hand, you have to have agreement and clarity, but on the other hand, you can't have what you would term as sort of a never-endum, where debate just rolls on endlessly with people seeking to sort of chip away at corners of it because they never really liked it, but they didn't feel they had the opportunity to have their say. At some point, it is closed, it is done. Obviously, one of the major uses of it is as a basis for a trust application. Probably you won't be able to use it as a trust application, but it will be the core. Turned into a brochure for major donors and other interested parties, again, fairly self-evident. As part of a planning application submission, quite a common use. And elements adapted into an appeal for individual donations. Again, quite straightforward. Someone is particularly interested in an element of it. They don't need to see all of it. One of the sadnesses of modern life is people don't read. They don't read anything anymore. In my experience, anything over about 2 pages, people won't read. It's just sadness of life. The days when people would sit down and read very long documents are over. You just need to be aware of that. But the other thing, and this is a key point, is it is a dynamic document. If the project changes, it changes. You change the document with the project. As money comes in, you update the financial section. So we were looking to raise £250,000. We're now looking to raise £175,000 because we've raised £75,000. Maths, is that right? No, not even close. But the financial element will update. Some aspects of the project may update. Your timetable will certainly update. All of that. So review and edit it. Just as you go along, and don't be afraid of that. But just be aware that, you know, just be, again, control the versions. Have a, you know, if you change it in September, you know, you have it was originally written in January, you make some changes to it in September. This is the case for support September 2023. So, Francis.
And just to be, before I move on to top tips, just to be totally clear, you need your original case for support agreed. The review and everything comes on the agreed document to include what's gone on, that you have been successful and you now need less money. But also, things, with the best will in the world, things change. And if you find that part of the project isn't needed anymore, then that will probably create a new case for support. So just be aware that, yes, you do need to review and update when necessary, because you don't want to send funders old information, but it should be on the agreed document. One of the things that we are quite often asked is, how can I write a case for support? And we actually suggest you use the Garfield Weston model. You've got the link there. Garfield Weston is very clear about outlining, this is what you need. You need your kind of executive summary. Tell us a little bit about the church, tell us what you want to do, tell us why you want to do it. All of those things are laid out for you. So it's a good model to follow. Matthew's already said, get as many letters, quotes of support as you can from the project, from as many different people as you can. I was working with one church and they managed to get, I think, their archdeacon and also a member of the council to kind of write a letter of support, and then they got a few other pieces. Yeah, they really are. The use of stories within your case. Funders, especially grant makers, get a lot of applications. You need something to make it stand out. And so you are telling a story. Make it interesting, make it kind of so that people get drawn into what you want to see, rather than bulleting, which is fine, very factual, but people need to feel that passion, that empathy, so they think, yeah, this is something I want to support. And as Matthew said earlier, the impact now, that fact that if you can't do this, the difference will be catastrophic. It is so important to funders. The use of pictures, please don't line people up and take a photo. That's not what this is about. It's action shots. It's maybe if you're doing a Wednesday lunch for kind of older people, they're all there and they're kind of chatting and they're maybe doing some craft or something. That's the sort of thing you need, so you can show the happiness, the impact. But only provide photos, pictures. First of all, you need to obviously make sure people are happy to have their photo in, but only if the funder says it's okay. Pay particular attention to the funder's requirements and then satisfy what they've asked for. Make it stand out, and that goes back to the passion, so that make it interesting, so that people feel, a funder will feel, actually, I need to support this. I need to make a contribution, a donation, because if I don't, then it will have such a negative impact on the beneficiaries. And again, start large and then condense down. Follow the funders, the funders' instructions when you're applying. Give them as much information as they need. And the other thing is, when you take your case for support, only answer the questions that are asked. Don't throw everything at it, because so many times I read applications and people have thrown everything at it but haven't answered the question the funder has asked to start with. So I think that
we're all
probably brings
of a
us to the end
generation.
of our formal presentations.
What I was going to say, Carol, is I think we're all of a generation who did exams, and think of this, if certainly trust applications, they are an exam. You are being asked a specific question. This isn't an opportunity to say everything you know. We've all answered those kind of exam questions. Here's everything I know. But they are asking you specific questions because they want to fund specific types of work to do specific types of things. Read those questions, understand what they are asking you. And this applies to individuals. It applies to anyone who's giving you money. They have objectives for their money. They are giving you money because you share their objectives. And that can be, as I say, individuals, trusts, foundations, local businesses, whatever it is. They have a set of objectives they want to reach. They view you as a good way to reach and meet those objectives. Think about what they are asking you and answer that directly. And don't be tempted to kind of kitchen sink it. Shorter is better, always.
Thank you very much. That's really interesting information. Does anyone have any questions? I mean, feel free to just go ahead, Ian.
I think there's one.
Yes, I've got one really. We have two types of project in the church at the moment. One is an ambition to have a loo, and the need for that for people coming, particularly a distance from a funeral, is evident, and I can imagine writing that up in all the ways that are expressed. But the much bigger issue is the outcome of our quinquennial inspection report. And if I look back over the huge amount of work we've done in the last 10 years, none of it has directly benefited anybody, except that it makes sure that in 500 years' time, the building won't have fallen down. So it's really hard to see how you make something as practical as a building fit the sort of language that you're suggesting. Because, you know, we can fix the medieval windows at great expense. But we can hold church services perfectly happily without doing it.
But this is where I never think I think that I never see any harm in slightly amplifying the risk. You know, you can replace your windows, but if you don't replace your windows, the existing windows will fall out and then the rain will come in.
I accept that, but you can see what I mean.
I do.
Talked about feeding the hungry, helping the children, lots of community things, which are tremendously valuable. But we spend an inordinate amount of our time, perhaps far too much, fixing the building we've got.
Francis.
I just sort of, responding to that as well, Ian. I think it is a challenge. I think perhaps this is partly where choosing a good, correct selection of funders for you then is also important. You know, targeting those who will give to buildings, and not bothering approaching ones where they're very clear that they want to see something you can't provide. And I appreciate that then narrows down the choice potentially, but it's probably better than making applications that aren't going to succeed. So yes, I think careful selection of appropriate funders to apply to is important. And also, I suppose, being creative about the benefit. You know, you're saying preserving the building for the future generations, and thinking of creative ways to gather evidence for the fact that that building being there does matter to people. And I know that's difficult, but just a few ideas.
Yeah, I mean, the Norfolk Churches Trust will clearly be on the list, and they've been terribly generous to us in the past, and I would, at a guess, think they will be in the future. But they won't pay for the whole of the work.
Ian, I was at a fundraising conference and somebody was talking about inside out thinking, and it's because we know what needs to be done, and because of the building needs constant repair, and I take it, is it a grade listed building? Yes,
it's 1 or 2 stars.
A listed building?
Yes.
Yeah, that's fine. So sometimes we get so hung up on that, about we don't always see the benefits of the repairs for future generations, as you were saying. And in some cases it's quite helpful to maybe have an outside person do some work for you, just so that they can spark some ideas. And I appreciate that if you work with an outside consultant, there is a cost to that. But in my experience working with the Diocese of London, doing that at the outset, so somebody can actually say, well, I understand what's going on, and these are the benefits that I think you can appeal to funders for, you may find that a really, really helpful thing to do. Only a suggestion, but I think worth discussing, to kickstart, if you like, your project.
Yes, the group I sat on for 18 months was deliberate.
Sorry?
The group I sat on deliberately for 18 months in the diocese was a group of church wardens and incumbents, and then a group of people who were not, as far as I know, active churchgoers, but brought tremendous appreciation of churches as buildings, as heritage, and it was really interesting. And I think we've come up with an ambition to try and involve more people in sustaining, the value of churches.
Absolutely, yeah. And the National Churches Trust is absolutely a funder that you should go to.
Yeah.
But it is difficult. There is no two ways about it. And all of the churches I'm in contact with one way or another are having to make difficult choices because they can't fund everything that it would be desirable for them to do. And that is just, I think, a sad fact of life at the moment, that they're having to make quite difficult choices. And you're absolutely right. The loo is the loo is a higher priority because people coming to a funeral would need to be able to go to the loo. Perfectly reasonable and well understood. Some other stuff is more difficult, and I'm not going to soft soap it and go it's easy, because it really is not at the moment. It really isn't, and very tough choices are having to be made across all sorts of projects, unfortunately.
Yeah.
This may not be strictly relevant to churches, but it's certainly relevant in other groups I'm involved with, that governments tend to produce new sources of money, £250,000 for an area, with a very tight timescale. You must apply within a month, you must get all the permissions in place within 6 months, you must get the work done within 12 months, which seems to me to mitigate against any sort of sensible planning and approach. Do you have any advice on that?
In my experience, this is where having a good relationship with your local councillors and your local MP, if you've got a good one, can be really vital, because they're the ones who can actually, if you've got active local councillors, they will know when this money is coming through and will be able to help you get it, and they will be able to get your ducks in a row. And I've seen councillors turn planning around into, there's a funding pot which has a 6-month timeline, and I've seen local councillors step in, get planning permission in 6 weeks, get everything ready and get you good to go. So that is where those kind of links really come in handy. The other one I've seen, and this is, this is a bit of a counsel of perfection, but is also have projects ready to sort of wrapped up and kind of ready to go for when these opportunities. There's something you want, and I mean, this is about someone having the time to do this, and please don't, I am not naive about what this is asking for, but if you have people resource available, have a project support and a case for support ready to go for a project that you want to do, which is quite important, but which isn't like number one on your list. And then if these opportunities pop up, you can just revive it and have it ready to go. Carol.
But that is why the case for support is so important, because if you have it there, then when you are so right, Ian, it seems that that the statutory sources are saying, right, this is what's going to happen, and you have maybe just a month to apply, and then you get the money and you have to use it in 6 months. If you have your case for support ready, if you know your budget, and you've got your fundraising plan, and you've got all your permissions, planning permission and faculty, if necessary, all there ready to go, then you can respond immediately. Now, like Matthew, I'm not saying that is easy, because very few churches, in my experience, have ever been in that position. But as things change, I think churches will need to have that information at their fingertips. So if and when those opportunities come up, they can take immediate action.
Hmm.
I mean, it's not easy, and I'm not going to sort of sit here and go, but yeah,
No.
but you know, as I
Yeah.
say, but local councillors are key, because they can also, in my experience, and I know exactly the kind of money you're talking about, they can also stretch timelines and you know, kind of, they can get the money and sit on it and then transfer it. There's all sorts of wheezes that they can do to kind of slightly stack the deck in your favor. Not hugely, but just enough, in my experience, because they really want that money to come to their local area. They really, really, really want that. That is brilliant. That goes on their election leaflet next time round. Everybody's happy, you know. It's kind of, it's democracy in action.
Thank you.
Well, I mean, unless anyone has any other questions, I think thank you very much to Matthew and Carol. That was really, really interesting.
My pleasure.
And I think there's a
My
lot to
pleasure.
take away from it, you know, whether your project is big or small, whether